Thanks, Eduardo. I want to echo what you're doing for the continent. It's much appreciated.
Oh, thanks. It's the continent doing for itself. We simply do a little bit of facilitation. Good to see you. If you show yourself, by the way. We will soon start, colleagues. Aye, a new haircut.
Okay, sorry, I'm mobile today, so I'm got my camera off, but I'll be with you.
Good. Nous avons le plaisir d'avoir plusieurs participants du Cameroun maintenant.
It's a pleasure that we now have lots of participants from Cameroon. We have Josephine, Mr. Matthias from the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training. We have Mr. Jordan from the Ministry of Higher Education. So we'll have your presentation during the next webinar. Thank you, Eduarda, for presenting Cameroon's participants. It will be a pleasure for us to share with you the experience of Cameroon during the next webinar on the 3rd of March. Thank you.
We would like also to welcome the representative from the social partners from the trade unions, the Organization of Trade Unions Unity. Valentin Ude is here with us also. Welcome, Valentin. Good to see you. We also have the representative from one of the regional economic communities, namely from IGAD, Mr. Sagal. Welcome, Sagal Abdul. Most welcome.
Good morning, Eduarda and participants. Thank you for facilitating this session, and I look forward to the discussions that come about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sagal. Bonjour, notre chère collègue Brigitte Bouquet de France Compétences.
Good morning, Brigitte. You always participating and contribute always to the sessions for sharing experiences. Hi, Brigitte. We also have our colleague from Cape Verde.
In practical implementation of the system in Cabo Verde. So we have now 53 participants, and I think we could start our session today, if you all agree. So welcome everybody from different countries, from different organizations. I just also see that Dennis Van Hessel from the European Commission, he works very actively in the activities, let's say, coordination of the European Qualifications Framework. He's also here with us. Always good to see you, Dennis. So we start. Good morning, Dennis. So we start now our webinar. Maybe our colleague from the African Union Commission, Mr. Emmanuel Chigozie Okonkwo, will still join us, which will be, of course, as always, very, very welcome. So yes, you are here? Yes?
Yes, please.
You are here,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay, yes, just I just see you, yes. So, colleagues, welcome, good morning. We start our 13th peer learning webinar. We have many new participants today from different countries. We have many participants, for example, from Kenya, new, and other countries as well. This is the 3rd year of ACQF peer learning webinars, and this session, this series of 3 webinars in February and March is entirely focused, dedicated to the discussion of experiences, policies related with recognition of prior learning, validation des acquis de l'expérience, recognition, certification of competences. So also in Portuguese, reconhecimento, validação e certificação de competências. I will now pass immediately the floor to Emile, our colleague, program manager at the African Union Commission Division for Education, Emile Chigozie Okonkwo. The floor is yours for your welcome remarks. Very good to see you, Emile.
Good to see you too, Eduarda. It is indeed a pleasure to join the peer learning webinar. I think this is the very first for the year 2022. It is such a great privilege to see our colleagues who we now call the ACQF family. But let me very briefly just give a brief opening remarks on behalf of Mr. Hambani Mashaleni, who is the acting head for education and science as well as technology at the African Union Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, you recall that the ACQF has been a very instrumental to the development of continental qualification frameworks across the continent. And for us at the AUC, peer learning activities is one of the most essential work packages of the ACQF development. We hold these activities in high value, mainly due to the rich outcomes and the engagement from you, the stakeholders. Because in fact, the purpose of this exercise is to boost engagement of the African Union member states, as well as to develop common knowledge and understanding of key concepts, objectives, as well as types and operational instruments of the national and regional qualification frameworks there is on the continent, as we build our own ACQF, that is the continental framework. You also recall that the experiences over time has proved that these activities indeed is very, very instrumental in the development of the ACQF. We've used this opportunity to learn across the various member states what they are doing as it relates to qualification frameworks, as well as other relevant thematics as it relates to continental development of a continental framework. Today, we will continue the series of peer learning, which mainly focuses on, like Edward has said, recognition of prior learning. We will hear experiences and debate on the various and different policies and guidelines for RPLs. I would like to really encourage us to build on the momentum from last year, learn and share experiences, and to assure us that this platform will continue to create the enabling environment for knowledge generation. Without further ado, I think, Eduarda, I will pass the floor back to you to take us through the agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emile, for your encouraging opening remarks. So, as always, we would like to remind participants to please keep the sound off when you are not speaking. You can, of course, keep your camera on. It's always good to see you. If you did not give consent to recording, please keep your camera off, and please use the interpretation. You can choose the language of your preference. You have the interpretation facility. You can choose Portuguese or French, of course, English as well. If you have any questions or if you notice that interpretation is not very clear, please send us a small message through the chat box. The chat box is very useful, as we all know. You can write your comments, you can write also your questions about the topics in discussion. Thank you. So the focus of this 13th peer learning webinar is recognition of prior learning, validation of non-formal and informal learning. This is a fundamental topic nowadays, and even more as the transformation of learning requires that we learn all the time to upskill, to upgrade our competences. All learning acquired in all contexts is valuable. So validation and recognition of knowledge, skills, and competences from non-formal and informal learning from experience is essential, an essential dimension of lifelong learning policies, and it is fundamental for social and economic inclusion. So we have 3 cases today. The first one is the presentation of the ACQF guideline on validation of learning. So the focus will be, of course, on the section of this guideline that is addressing exactly recognition of prior learning, the term that is, let's say, used widely on the continent. So the second case is validation in Europe. So 10 years of experience implementing the Council recommendation on validation of non-formal and informal learning. So these are 2 cases of a regional, multi-country scope. But then the third case will be a country case. So the Republic of Cabo Verde is going to present the system, the RVCC system, meaning the reconhecimento, validação, certificação de competências, the system, the policy framework, the links to the NQF, and also first results of implementation. In the last session, we will have the remarks by our discussant, and today we will have our colleague Kailash Algu sharing his views. Then we have a question and answers possibility and a poll. The total duration of the webinar is 2 hours and a half. For those participants who are joining these webinars for the first time, I would like just very briefly to contextualize. So these webinars of the ACQF project are part of the capacity development program of the project developing the ACQF, and Emmanuel gave a brief overview in his opening remarks. So this project has started in September 2019 and is continuing until September 2022. The main objectives or the main objective of this project is to lay the foundations for the ACQF as a sustainable policy instrument, a reference qualifications framework for lifelong learning, connecting regional national qualifications frameworks, supporting comparability, transparency of qualifications of all levels, subsectors, and contributing to relevant policies for continental integration, using a participative approach. So the ACQF is a very large, let's say, regional qualifications framework. It is 55 countries involved. It is also 8 regional economic communities. The ACQF is an initiative, a policy initiative of the African Union based on the key AU policies such as the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, the AU Free Movement Protocol, and also the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we call it a qualifications framework for mutual trust, cooperation, support to countries and regions. Very briefly also about the main outputs of the ACQF development project. So the most fundamental output is the ACQF policy document and action plan, supported by 10 guidelines and 10 training modules as fundamental technical foundations. Naturally, that all this work is also based on analysis, and we started in-depth analysis and wide with the mapping study in 2020, and we have scenarios ACQF feasibility study, school curriculum study, also work done with one of the regional qualifications frameworks in Africa, the SADC qualifications framework, ACQF governance study, and other studies. Also very important component, as you know, then the capacity development, networking, and outreach to people. The ACQF website, I hope you had the possibility to visit it. And also this first governance model that has been developed, put in place for this time of the project, and it is based on the steering and supporting role of the AUC to start. Then the advisory group, it has been expanded since July 2021, and the project team with all of the stakeholders part of this community. The capacity development program is composed of various modalities of interaction and learning. They are presented here. So all in all, we have 15 peer learning webinars, 12 in the first 2 years, 2020 and 2021, and now 3 additional this year. Training workshops on and offline. So there will be an important training program starting in April. Conferences, work with countries, also an important component. E-learning platform is being established, and also work with education institutions. We just want very briefly to recall a little bit what has been done in the first year. So the first year was essentially dedicated to peer learning about national and regional qualifications frameworks. And you have on the screen all the various examples, cases that were shared with this community through the peer learning webinars, 7 in the first year. Then in 2021, we diversified the topics, the thematic areas of the peer learning webinars, including, of course, more sharing on national qualifications frameworks, quality assurance frameworks and concrete practices at regional level, also country level, recognition of learning and qualifications. And we had already one very rich experience shared in 2021. It was from Kenya National Qualifications Authority, shared their approach, policy, and experience with RPL. Then we also had cases on national qualifications frameworks, databases and qualifications, so management information systems of national qualifications frameworks, the cases of South Africa and Kenya, and several thematic presentations. For example, on learning outcomes, level descriptors, school curriculum, micro-credentials. Also for your information, we use this opportunity to share more information on the capacity development program planned for 2022. So besides the peer learning webinars, we already know 3 in the period February and March, but also 2 in-depth training programs of 5 days each, one in April, 18th to 22nd of April, and the second in July, hopefully hybrids if the conditions allow. Then ACQF conferences, one in May and another one in September. The learning management system for e-learning in establishment, so hopefully it will be ready in March, and additional thematic briefs on new themes. The ACQF website is at your service. It is a very easy access, acqf.africa. Please visit, use, contribute. Or you can also send us news about your national qualifications frameworks and systems for publication on the ACQF website. This is just a view of the homepage. There are many resources. All the capacity development programs program is there. So all the materials of the peer learning webinars is available, very easy to use. You have, for example, also access to video learning materials, very well presented videos, real NQF cases, please access and use. And now a few words about validation of learning. And the idea here is that validation of learning gives us wings to go over obstacles, to go into new endeavors and opportunities in life. RPL, VAE, RVCC, so different terms are used. Let us say validation of learning in general, despite the differences that exist. So learning is done everywhere in many different forms and for different goals. For example, also our webinars, online, digital, are of course learning opportunities. I'm just showing a couple of pictures showing different ways of learning. One of them is actually from Cape Verde, the third So already one of the pictures of the result of training for RPL professionals. Now, some examples from Kenya, from the RPL policy and pilot implementation in Kenya in different sectors, including car mechanics, welding, textiles. More examples. Another one, a concrete assessment exercise in a workshop. And of course, also our own learning, informal, in our daily professional life. And this is a picture of Cameroon with our colleagues from Cameroon working together. So making visible non-formal and informal learning is fundamental. These are fundamental parts of lifelong and life-wide learning for transition, for upskilling, reskilling, for transitions in life, in work. People learn anytime, anywhere throughout life, not only in formal education and training systems and pathways, but also in non-formal and informal learning contexts. And this is why it's so important to talk about this topic and develop systems that allow then people to have new opportunities. And important also to consider that the growth of digital and online learning, access to digital skills assessment tools, digital credentials, are also new dimensions and new potentialities for recognition of prior learning, so validation. And they can benefit candidates. They can also increase the effectiveness of RPL validation systems. A few words about our speakers today. So we have 3 cases. We will start with the case of the ACQF guidelines on validation of learning. And our speaker is Mr. Modest Hamalabi. So Modest is actually a director in the Zambia Qualifications Authority. And he is also one of the authors, member of the team of developing ACQF guidelines, namely the guideline on validation of learning. Then we have Ernesto Villalba Garcia from CEDEFOP and Emile Tarmendisch. Amilcar representing the coordination unit of the National Qualification System of the Republic of Cabo Verde. So Modest is, as said, a member of the expert team developing these 2 guidelines. So one is on validation of learning. The second one is on registers and databases of qualifications. So both are ACQF guidelines, part of the compendium of 10 guidelines. And he will introduce himself, of course. Ernesto is a key reference expert, researcher, and analyst on validation of non-formal and informal learning in the EU. He has been very closely working with, for example, the European inventory on validation of non-formal and informal learning. And his presentation will also give you many insights about this work. So thank you very much, Ernesto, for being here with us. So Emile Tarmendisch, he is head of the technical unit in the coordination unit of the National Qualification System, technical unit dealing with the National Qualifications Framework, with the National Catalog of Qualifications, and with RPL, which is called RVCC in Cape Verde. So we immediately pass the floor then to our first speaker, Mr. Modest Hamalabi. Modest, thank you so much. You can share your presentation. You have 25 minutes, more or less, for your presentation, 30 minutes. Thank you so much. Colleagues, you can use the interpretation possibility, please. French and Portuguese.
Thank you, Eduarda. Good afternoon, good morning, participants. As Eduarda did indicate, my name is Modest Hamalabi. I'm actually the Director of Technical Services at the Zambia Qualifications Authority. We wish to take this opportunity to thank Eduarda for giving us this opportunity to share the presentation on what we are doing in relation to guideline number 4 on the validation and recognition of learning. So as Eduardo did indicate, basically what we are presenting in here are proposals that are in the guidelines, and I think we still welcome comments as we go on to ensure that we have a guideline that represents basically what is prevailing or what are the standards around a validation and recognition of learning. So I will not give you, sorry, I think yeah. So in terms of the presentation, as Eduardo indicated, we have this guideline we have developed which covers a broad area in relation to validation and recognition of learning. But the focus for today will basically be looking at what we have put in the guideline in relation to the recognition of prior learning, or RPL, or validation of acquired experience, as others might call it. So I'll give you as a start, basically an introduction to what that guideline is all about, some of the concepts that we have looked at in there, the overview in terms of the validation, and then focus on the content in relation to recognition of prior learning. Okay. So in the guideline, basically it starts with looking at the purpose of that guideline, which basically is to provide member states with a framework for fair and transparent validation and recognition of learning. Ultimately, this will facilitate mobility of persons from one country to another for either study, for research, for teaching, or for work arrangements. Who are the target users in the guideline? So we are saying competent recognition authorities, the people who are in charge of recognition of qualifications and so forth, will basically make use of the guideline. We have quality assurance agencies. They will also make use of these guidelines. We are also looking at those that are involved in curriculum development and any other stakeholders that are involved in the management of qualifications. So they will become target users for these guidelines. In terms of the objectives of guideline number 4, is basically we are saying facilitate the recognition of qualifications among African states. We are also saying facilitate the recognition of prior learning within and among the African states, facilitate the implementation of the credit accumulation and transfer systems in Africa, or CATS. We are also saying one of the objectives is to facilitate systematic exchange of information with ACQF, National Qualifications Framework, and other recognition structures. So I think that briefly gives you the introduction. I move on to the issues around the concepts, the principles that have been provided for in the guideline. So in the context of the guideline, what is really validation and recognition? We are indicating that these are procedures by which competent authorities do recognize qualifications, credits, and prior learning in accordance with the norms and standards that are recognized nationally and internationally. In terms of the purpose of validation, basically we are saying validation of learning provides opportunities for further education. It provides opportunities also for seeking employment, thereby facilitating mobility, progression within and across national qualifications frameworks and also national qualification system. Among the benefits that we have highlighted in the guideline in relation to validation of learning is we are saying basically it assures surety to the stakeholders once the qualification has been validated. It identifies the level at which the qualification is recognized on the National Qualifications Framework or the Regional Qualifications Framework. In the case of RPL, it of appropriate competencies the knowledge and the skills that an individual has. It also contributes to equality of education, institutions, and qualifications. It also promotes international understanding of education systems. So we understand there are various education systems. So through the process of validation, then you will end up understanding what is prevailing in a different country. It enhances the right to education and training, and also a validation helps in identification of diploma and accreditation meals. Despite the benefits that I've just highlighted, it goes without saying that this process is also affected by a number of factors. Among these is, we have indicated the diversity of the validation and recognition procedures that are applicable in various regions or countries. We also have the diversity of the education systems. They also do affect the validation. We also have the scarce of information. In some jurisdictions, you might be looking for something. In certain areas, it's difficult for you to get certain information. We also have issues around the language barriers, and also pandemics such as the COVID. I'm sure this is a live issue that we have been dealing with in the past years. I move on to the overview of what you have provided in this guideline in relation to validation and accreditation of learning. Basically, there we are indicating the 3 modes of which validation of learning could be undertaken. So we are saying the first one is looking at the recognition of qualifications. You also look at credit accumulation and transfer systems, and we also have recognition of prior learning. Now, as we have indicated, the guideline provides further details on issues of recognition of qualifications, on credit accumulation and transfer systems, but the focus of this is to look at the one which is in the center, which is the recognition of prior learning, in terms of what the guideline is proposing and what we've put in there. Okay, so in the context of ACQF, we are saying RPL supports countries in documenting or adapting or domesticating or adapting a level. They promote and expand access to target groups to employment opportunities, and also further studies, promotes common understanding of the various forms of learning previously undertaken, regardless of the mode that was used. I think this was elaborated area by Eduardo. Who can then benefit from recognition of prior learning? So we are saying prior learning basically looks at individuals who have knowledge, skills, competencies, but have no qualification to attest to that. And therefore, RPL is basically not suitable for individuals without experience, skills, and competencies. And it's basically centered on an individual and not the system. Okay, so we move on. In the guideline, we have also provided some guiding principles that we believe there are different versions, as you'll see later on, in terms of what is applicable in different countries. But we are proposing 5 key principles that might guide the implementation of RPL. So we look up at the policies and the procedures. I'll be expanding this. We have information, the roles and responsibilities, the support that surround the implementation of RPL, and how you do the monitoring and the review of that. In relation to the policies and procedures, the guidelines basically provide for that there must be transparent and fair decisions. So policies should cover for that. Where there are set limits to what can be recognized, that should be explicitly stated in the policies. And then the prior learning that is being recognized should be clearly stated on the student's transcripts. In relation to information, we are saying the information and guideline materials that you provide for RPL should be able to provide clear and accessible information for everyone to be able to read and understand what is applicable. The terminology that is used should also be explicitly defined. I think you have heard just when we are talking about RPL, others call it as validation of acquired experience. So whichever terminology we use, the idea is that information should be clearly expressed and defined so that people are able to follow. Okay, information and materials guidance should clearly outline the processes, the rules, the regulations for assessment of the competences. And then we are also indicating that there should be information on what type of assessment tools that you need to use in implementing RPL. In relation to responsibilities, we are also providing that there must be clear responsibilities for verifying and making decisions on RPL. These must be stated in your document or in the guidelines. In terms of support, we are saying under this principle, you need to split the timelines for processing applications and also how you prepare for those applications and the timelines for providing the feedback to the candidates who apply for RPL. That needs to be provided. And lastly, on the principles, but not the least, is the issues of monitoring. Basically, we provide for that there should be regular monitoring and review of the policies and procedures to ensure that they remain relevant and up to date. And where possible, you must ensure that the monitoring mechanisms that are in place fit within the established institutional frameworks so that you are not dealing with things outside what has been provided. I move on. Now, this slide is to look at the types of learning to be considered for RPL. And what we have done, we have provided a recommendation in the guideline. However, before we could give that recommendation, we decided to put in the guideline a summary of what is prevailing. And therefore, the first slide I'm showing you here is basically showing you examples of selected countries within Africa who are applying RPL and the type of learning that is being considered. Please, as we have indicated, in an event that these policies have changed from your respective countries, this is what we were able to get from our research. So we'll be happy to get an update in terms of in case that one or two area, maybe you have made a change. So if you look at it, so in Angola, basically the type of learning is non-formal and informal. For Cape Verde, is formal, non-formal, and informal. Kenya is all the three areas, the formal, non-formal, and informal. Lesotho, we have formal, non-formal, and informal. Mauritius, formal, non-formal, and informal. Then Morocco, we have non-formal and informal. Mozambique is non-formal and informal. Seychelles is formal, non-formal, and informal, while South Africa is all the three areas, formal, non-formal, and also Zambia covers all the three types of learning. What then are we proposing? So if you look at what you've provided in the summary there, among the selected countries, you would see that generally all forms of learning tend to be covered, except in one or few countries. And therefore, what we've done in the guideline is basically to propose that for ACQF purposes, all the three forms of learning, informal, non-formal, and also formal, that they must be covered as part of the recognition of prior learning. We are cognizant that for formal learning, basically this tends to be covered through the credit accumulation and transfer system cards. In terms of the stages, as you are implementing RPL, again, we have provided information in terms of the scenarios or what is prevailing area or different perspective. So I start by sharing with you the international perspective. So according to the International Labour Organization, ILO, in there, I think they have a 3-step approach or 3 stages. So you have awareness and information stage, you have counseling and facilitating, then you have assessment and certification stage. Then in relation to the EU, it has a 4 stages. So you have the identification stage, the documentation stage, the assessment stage, and then the certification stage. Then coming back to Africa, we picked the SADC. So we have for SADC is a 6-step level. So you have the first one, information and guidance. Then you have administrative registration, assessing eligibility of candidates, doing the assessment as stage 4. Then you have stage 5, provision for an appeal, and the last stage where the candidates are certified. Okay, so that is from the international perspective. So we move on to, again, we share at a country level in terms of how this is being applied. So if you look at country level, we have selected countries as well there. So we have Cape Verde, which uses 3 stages. You have information and guidance, recognition and validation of competencies, and then certification of competencies. For Kenya, is 4 stages: assessment of skills and competencies, submission of portfolio of evidence, then checking of the skills and the competencies, and then issuance of the certificate. For Mauritius, we have pre-application, pre-screening, facilitation, and then the last stage is that of assessment. Morocco, information and counseling of the candidates, admissibility, you check for that, you have the follow-ups, and then you have the certification stage. Mozambique has 3 stages: evaluation, validation, and certification. Seychelles, we have 4 stages: mentoring and facilitation, preparation of evidence through portfolio, then they do the assessment, the evidence, and then the certification of the candidates. South Africa also has 4 stages: information and guidance, assessment, follow-up, and certification. And then for Zambia, you have 4 stages as well: application, evaluation, validation, and certification of the candidates. So now, given the international perspective and also the country perspective of selected countries, so for ACQF, we have recommended a 4-stage approach, basically where you start with identification of the candidates, the information that they need to do. Then we move on to documentation, where they provide the documents or evidence or portfolio of evidence, as they call it in the other jurisdiction under that stage. And then we go to the 3rd stage, where that evidence is assessed. And once the assessment has been done, the candidate that meet the requirements are then given the certification. So in broad or in general terms, we are recommending a 4-stage for the ACQF. Moving on, I think this is my last slide in relation to that. So what then becomes the outcome of the RPL process? So what it results in is basically we are saying the candidates would end up getting full qualifications, they could get part qualifications, or where in some other jurisdictions people get credits or units towards a qualification. A candidate would also get an exemption from an academic prerequisite for entering the formal education and training system for all or part of a particular curriculum. The results also may be positioning potential learners on formal learning pathways before they proceed with their training. Another result, it could be the certification of labor market competencies. And other than that, the first ones I've highlighted to do more of where there's a recognition, but recognition using different areas. But also you could have as an outcome that possibly the competencies are not recognized. So in principle, generally in summary, those are some of the principles that we have highlighted in the guideline in relation to RPL. And with that said, I wish to thank you all for listening. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Modest, for the presentation. And naturally that this work is in progress. The first draft of all ACQF guidelines was presented to ACQF Advisory Group meeting on 13th of January. The comments that we have received through the consultation process are being processed. So this presentation concerns this first draft, and it is complemented by elements of research, as Modest very well has discussed. If you have questions, you can please, or comments, please use the chat box. The last session of our webinar will have also space for questions and answers. So for now, I don't see any questions or comments on the chat box. So in that case, we would then move to the next presentation, and it is then the presentation by Ernesto Villalba Garcia is going to speak about about validation of non-formal and informal learning in Europe. Thank you, Ernesto. The floor is yours. You can share the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Eduarda, for inviting me. Really a pleasure to be here. Well, already congratulations on the work that you have done. I think it's quite impressive. And I'm, again, happy to be here because I think that there's a lot from us to learn from what you have been doing. And I hope that what I'm presenting today will be also useful for you. As Eduardo have said, my idea is to present a little bit of what we have been doing in Europe for the last 10 years on what we call validation of non-formal and informal learning. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me know if you can see it. And basically, well, in CEDEFOP, we have been, CEDEFOP is a decentralized agency from the European Commission. This means that we do work together with the Commission. We don't execute their policies, but we work together with the Commission and member states on developing policies, and we do studies. And we have a lot of information, especially on validation we have been working on for many years. Again, learning from anybody on this is always a pleasure. And I think there is a lot of information out there, and I hope that it can be useful. I'm going to start by going back to what Eduardo was saying about let's say, the learning that occurs everywhere and anywhere. And if you really think of the last time you have learned something, it hasn't been in a school or in a formal educational institution. So I think that that's a very important aspect to think of, because again, we learn everywhere, and that's where we have to start. We have to start really in learning. So move from education to learning in a way, and especially focusing on the learning outcomes. And this different learning in a way is going to give us different types of certification. And I think that one of the key issues that we're going to have to deal with in the next few years is that there's more and more diversity in the types of certification that we get from different countries, from different institutions in a way. And that is kind of the training providers, if you want, right? That are going to give you qualifications or certifications that are regulated, or qualifications and certifications that are not regulated. So I think that is an important element to take into account. And in a way, what is going to happen is, again, as I say, you will have different type of institutions there. And what we are going to try to do is to kind of bring all this invisible learning that might happen there to make it visible. No? So I always say that validation is basically a process in which you make the invisible visible and you give it a value, a currency that the individual can use. I mean, Modest has already talked a little bit about this, so I won't go too much into it. But I think that it's important to consider. I mean, that in Europe we define validation as a process, and I think this is a very important thing to take into account. And it's a process that we divide into 4 stages, as and I think that it's important to kind of look at each of these stages in a different way. What I think is always that the process of validation is going to have different emphasis depending on what is the objective that we have in the validation process. At the end of the day, we might want to get a formal qualification, but sometimes we might just want to have an indication of what people are have learned and how can they use it, for example, to obtain to go further in education. So it's not necessarily a formal certification that they are looking for, but just kind of an idea of what is they're learning. No? And this idea of the formative type of assessment, if you want, we are going to put more emphasis on those 2 first parts of the validation process, in which what we are focusing on is really documenting what has been the learning that has occurred. And the assessment part is not as important. So we might have some self-assessment and some sort of certification, but it's not as strong and as quality assured as a certification that you will get if you get a formal certification, right? From a formal education institution that is equivalent to a formal qualification. And I will talk about this in a second. But basically, I think that it's important that in Europe, we have kind of articulate the concept in this way, and I think that it has been very useful for different countries to adapt their different, very diversified type of systems. As also Modest mentioned, that there's a lot of fragmentation on validation procedures. There's a lot of diversity, and I think that what these 4 phases and the emphasis, the different emphasis that we can give to those 4 phases, allow the different countries in the European Union to kind of come together under one umbrella term of validation on non-formal and informal. And I have to say that this has been a long process. I mean, it has been now since already the 95 paper on teaching and learning. It was a white paper that the Commission started kind of, if you want, the process of it put in the place the lifelong learning ideas and all the memorandum of lifelong learning in 2000, where lifelong learning became an important element in the European policies, or a bigger element than before. And in that sense, validation of non-formal and informal learning started to play a role. Then, since then, there has been a lot of different policies, and I have had highlighted here some of them. And the new skills strategy that was just published in 2020 has validation as an important aspect for the development of lifelong learning. And I think that a crucial element in Europe was the Council recommendation of 2012, because this in a way brought together, or kind of all the member states, and kind of make them agree on certain principles. And to my understanding, at least for those guidelines that you are now developing, are to me that kind of common understanding that all these 55 countries, that is quite impressive, if you can manage to kind of that everybody has a similar understanding, I think that you really have a very good chance of creating something very valuable. And the recommendation gives 2 important elements. I mean, many different things. It asks member states to have validation arrangements by 2018. It has set up certain principles. And those principles are kind of gathered in the European guidelines. And I'll talk a little bit about it in a sec. But basically, the recommendation kind of gives weight to these guidelines that are very similar, I think, to the ones that you are trying to develop. And it also gives weight or political support, let's say, to the European Inventory on Validation. And I also will talk a little bit about it in a second. So first about the guidelines. Like in your case, what we are trying to do here is really give the member states different options and possible steps that they have to take in order to establish and to kind of develop validation arrangements. So we, again, as you know, the European Union doesn't have competences on education. So this means we cannot be too normative. And this means that what we are trying to provide in the guidelines is a set of ideas, a set of themes, a set of questions that member states have to kind of answer in order to create validation arrangements that are valuable. But again, this has to be adapted to each particular country, of course, and to the context in which it is. This is very important. But also, I think what the guidelines try to do is like, there are different options and there will be different consequences of those options. So it's not only about giving you the options or different things that we believe you have to do. It's like different actions will have different consequences. So for example, we might say that we believe that it's better that you make standards on validation similar to those of formal qualifications that are equivalent to the certificates that you get, but some countries might opt for having different equivalents. And that's also because they want their validation system to be very informal, if you want, or remain in the voluntary sector, for example, and not connection to the formal system. Well, this is something that is an option, but where we have to kind of acknowledge is that this will have different consequences. So the people that have got those certificates, the value of those certificates is not necessarily equal to the certificates on formal qualifications. What we need to do is to build bridges. And that's kind of what the principles on the guidelines do, that are kind of draw from the 2012 recommendation. And I'm not going to go into any of each of these. Again, some of them are similar to ones that I think you have. I think I want just to say that these 10 in a way are summarized into 2. It's crucial that these principles are accepted by everybody, in the sense that all learning, irrespective of where it has taken place, is valuable, and that formal education really complements and is complemented by non-formal and informal learning. It's not a competition. It's not that one substitute the other, but they are supposed to work together in a way. And that these 2 principles, I think, are really underlying all the other principles. But I want to highlight one aspect that we think are important, and in this context, I believe is quite relevant, is the connection to national qualification systems. Because again, I was saying there are many different types of learnings that will give you different type of certification or credentials, as we call them now. And the NQF, the national qualification frameworks and the regional qualification frameworks, to me, what they are doing is they are providing, if you want, a lighthouse where those different certifications can kind of look at themselves. I think I heard this from my colleague Lucas Salias the first time. But it's also that they are supposed to be bridges, I think, between these different contexts of learning. And in that sense, I think they have a really strong role to play. And even though it's not a necessary condition to have a national qualification framework, we believe that it helps in the process of creating systems of validation that are more robust. So the second thing that I was talking about that the recommendation puts emphasis on is on the update of the European inventory. While the guidelines were giving us the questions that countries have to kind of answer to establish validation arrangements, what we try to do in the inventory is to give the answers to those questions. How are the countries actually implementing validation? And there's a lot of information. We have had 7 editions now, and we are working on towards the next one. And we try to collect as much information as we can and differentiate it between different educational sectors. And this is important because, as we were talking about, there is a lot of fragmentation. And this means that you need, in a way, to see in each of these subsectors of education and these areas how validation is being carried out. So it's not only that we look at higher education, adult education, and vet, but we also try to see what is happening in the labor market. So validation arrangements in which trade unions and Chamber of Commerce are playing a major role, or sectoral associations. So this is very important. And then we also try to look at what is happening on the third sector. So what NGOs are doing in terms of identification, documentation of the skills, and recognition of validation of the skills. And in that sense, also, as I was saying, for example, in the third sector, we find that there is much more emphasis on identification and documentation that there is in certification. We also have some thematic studies on very specific areas, and we try to summarize this in a synthesis report. Everything's on our webpage. I invite you to have a look. The recommendation was evaluated in 2018. And in a way, I'm not going to go too much into this, but in a way, what we saw is that, okay, all the countries have some sort of validation arrangements in place. But there is still quite a lot of work to do. There is, as I say, a lot of fragmentation. There is the involvement of stakeholders, especially labor market stakeholders, social partners, is not as strong as we would like to see. And there is still poor amount of information in terms of the cost, but also in terms of the monitoring. So I was very happy to see that one of the elements in those guidelines that you were presenting is monitoring and evaluation. But I don't want to go too much into this. I just want to highlight these two aspects. The first thing is that what we have seen is that the standards that are used on validation tend to be exactly the same than in other and that the validation arrangements are informal systems. So this is we think quite positive, but still the certificates that one gets when he goes through validation are in many cases different than the ones that are not done by validation. So this means that to some extent countries can still see, or let's say people can still differentiate the way that these certifications have been acquired, and this might give an idea of different currencies, different values of these different certificates. If I can summarize what we have seen over these 10 years on validation arrangements, I think there are these three aspects that I think are fundamental. You have them also in your guidelines, I believe. So I think that we are in synchrony. The first one is that really the individual has to be at the center. We have to remember that we are doing this for the individual, and therefore all these difficulties, I mean, there is a lot of complexity on it, but we need to make sure that it is useful for the individual. And this means that you have to have adequate support. This means that you have to have guidance and counseling. And this means also that you have to clarify very specifically and explicitly and from the beginning. And I think that Modest has said this also. What is the goal? What is the ultimate goal of the validation process? Because as I said, there's going to be a very different process if what we are looking for is just for me to understand what do I want to do with my life and what are my skills and my capacities, than if I want to get a formal qualification equivalent to a formal qualification in the formal system. So very important aspect. The second thing, and I think it's also in your guideline, is the stakeholder involvement. It's crucial that the roles are very clearly defined. But I will go a little bit further and say that it's very important that we understand in what way validation arrangements are connected to other strategic policies. So active labor market policies, policies on guidance, policies on financing. So this is what we are now, instead of working very hard, trying to get to an understanding on how these different policies are connected. And this means that there has to be a common understanding and you have been talking about it. And networking and practices and best practice sharing will be important. And then finally, I think the using of learning outcomes, and as I was emphasizing, the NQF will be crucial. If we don't believe that, I mean, if we don't use learning outcomes and we put too much emphasis on the place where we are learning, there's no way, absolutely no way, that validation can actually happen. I have highlighted here, you will get the presentation afterwards, some countries where I think are good examples on some of these aspects. Yeah, I think the Nordic countries in general have a very good approach to making really the individual at the center. In Norway and Ireland, there are some very interesting examples of how to involve different stakeholders. Ireland has the RPL network. In Norway, there is a project specifically on Balancing Act, it's called, where they and the trade unions have been very much involved in developing standards for validation together with educational training systems. And in terms of learning outcomes and NQF, especially the case of Poland and France that has a long tradition of validation, are very interesting cases. And you have the references at the end of this presentation. Eduardo, I have 2 more minutes.
Yes, of
Okay.
course, you do.
Because I would like to kind of end with the key challenges that I think is in a way what I believe is what we are going to face in the next few years on validation and recognition of qualifications. The first challenge really is going to be to reduce complexity. As I have said, putting the individual at the center really means that we need to make this useful for the individual. And this means that the individual is going to have to navigate many different contexts. It's going to have to deal with many different stakeholders. It's going to have to kind of have many different professionals helping them, because the assessors are going to be a type of professional, the guidance practitioner is going to be another type of professional, the managers of the validation centers, if you want, is going to have to have another type of skills. So all this idea of putting the individual at the center, we really need to figure out how to reduce complexity and make it user-friendly while maintaining quality and reliability. And I think, again, that this possibility to put different emphasis, different phases of the process is important, but making sure that the process is coherent. And this I emphasize over and over again, the coherence of that validation process across all those different phases is fundamental. The second thing that I think is going to be a very important aspect, and that it was already a few years before and is going to maintain there, is the maintenance and the development and definition of standards. It's important that they are agreed so that different stakeholders accept that these are the standards that we want. The learning outcomes approach, as I said, was very important. And we need to figure out how are we going to navigate the dichotomy between education and labor market. Because in many countries, the standards for education and the standards in sectoral qualifications, for example, or sectoral certificates, or on the labor market even, are very different. And we need to find ways of connecting these two. And at the European Union, of course, we have ESCO trying to do some of that. The third aspect, I think, is the tools. Because we are seeing that now at the political level and the strategic level, we have to some extent that in place, to some extent in Europe. What we need now is to see how do we practically do the validation process. What are the tools and how is it different to kind of assess learning that has occurred outside the formal system in a very unstructured way? How do we make that valid and reliable? And there's a lot to do, I think, with the way that we are going to use ICT for that. And in that sense, I think digitalization and certification It's going to be another area of work. What we have now in Europe with the European digital credentials, I think it's very interesting what we are trying to do. But there is a huge the landscape of certification, and I was trying to show that in my previous slides, is changing, and there are many different types of certifications, and we need to kind of figure out how we are going to connect these different certifications. So with that, I leave you. I conclude. These are the references that you will receive. That's the view actually from my window at the office. Today I'm at work at home. That's the Mount Olympus, where the Greek gods are always looking at Sedefop, making sure that we are actually trying to follow their legacy, let's say. And just to conclude, there will be a Biennale. I will send the information to Eduarda. We are organizing together with the Education and Training Service Centers in Iceland and the Nordic Adult Learning Network, a Biennale in Iceland, precisely to discuss issues on validation of non-formal and informal learning. So I'll send the information afterwards. And thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to get comments or questions. Thank you, Eduardo.
Many thanks. Muchas gracias, Ernesto, for this very rich and clear presentation, which also transmits a lot of information on lessons learned, challenges, new perspectives, and thanks a lot. Before we pass to the fourth session, which is a country case, Cabo Verde, I would like to open a little bit the floor for comments or suggestions about these two, let's say, regional, cross-country, multi-country approaches, if we can call approaches. So the African Union development of a common approach, guideline, understanding of recognition of prior learning, validation des acquis de l'expérience, or reconhecimento, validação de competências. I try to use all the different terms so that nobody feels left behind. Then the other case is the European Union case with more than 10 years experience. And we have seen some comments and one specific question, very interesting one, on the chat box. But if colleagues, if participants would like to also raise their hand with any comment, bearing in mind that we are now talking about more the cross-country or regional approaches to validation or recognition of prior learning. Maha, you have the floor. Please, you can speak, ask your question, comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maha from Egypt.
Good morning, everyone. I have a question and a comment. The question is for Ernesto about, do you have professional or did you professionalize the work of a person that assists individuals in prior learning? Is there a degree or a qualification for a person to do that? And the comment or maybe a suggestion is for Modest. It was a very good presentation and I like the principles and the guidelines, but I didn't see, since we're planning this for all of Africa, I didn't see in the part related to information inter-country networking or a contact person or a contact authority where it could be a focal point for, because if you carry RPL certificate to another country, you need to know how this was done, or if you carry evidence of learning and want it to be recognized in another country, this other country would like to contact the source and get information. So maybe such a network would be of benefit for transnational cooperation in that respect. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Maha, for this proposal, very, very interesting one, and for the question to Ernesto. Maybe Ernesto, would you like to just give a quick reply?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that It's a very relevant question, actually, because that's actually one of the aspects that I believe also is important now at the European context, because what we see, as I was saying, is that the policies are in place, but professionalization of practitioners is limited. It depends. In some countries, there is a little bit of what you were saying, of some certification that might be specific for validation, but not much. I think in the Netherlands, there is some training. In the, I believe in Finland, they have some, but it's in general not yet very much developed. And I think that this is one of the aspects also that needs to be more elaborated at the European level, training. And I think that we are seeing also some developments in that way. So absolutely, I think that is something that we need to work more on. So thanks for that.
Maybe to be taken into account somehow in the new guidelines. I mean, the revised guidelines that are being now developed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe Modest, would you like to say some word concerning the question about network on RPL or information sharing on RPL across countries? Maybe this is something quite useful to be included also in the guideline as a proposal.
Yeah, indeed, Eduardo, that's a good suggestion. We will take into board as we do the second draft of the guideline. We see how we could possibly look at providing contacts. Although currently, I know we have not provided the references, but there are references in the guidelines where some of that information was coming from in terms of what is prevailing in the various countries. So I think if one looks at the full guideline, we will be able to pick some of the references from there. But whether in relation to the actual contacts of the people there, we need to include them in the guideline. Possibly that's a matter of which will be presented to the advisory group, and we see whether we could do add a section of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Modest. There is another participant with the hand raised. Please, you have iPhone as a name.
Oui.
Please take the floor.
Oui, c'est.
Bonjour.
En fait, c'est Yakuba Garba Maïga.
Yeah, I'm Yakuba Garba from Mali. How are you, Eduarda? Yes, I'm well, thank you. Please go ahead. I followed all the interventions with much interest. Mine is the second intervention that's about the involvement of trade union, but I did not really understand for professional branches, because this is really interesting to know more about, unless I did not understand well what was said earlier.
Did you understand? Yes, Ernesto, that's for you. What is the participation contribution of professional sectors, employers in validation in Europe?
Translated did a good job. Thanks for the question. I think that what I was trying to say, well, the first thing is, it's important from our point of view that different stakeholders are involved in the validation process, in developing the validation system. And then what we are seeing in Europe and what we look at, let's say, is what are the different aspects, the different contexts in which validation occurs. So you will have validation that is mainly done by educational institutions. So basically, you have a vocational school, for example, that is allowed to give prior learning assessment. So somebody arrives there and they can be assessed in their prior learning. But in many countries, the trade unions or the Chamber of Commerce, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but okay, there are actually many. They will, the sectoral association, for example, so the sectoral association on, actually in Norway, the example that I was talking about is, it's specifically on retail sector. So they will create their own system. They will have their own system of training, their own qualifications, if you want, their own certification. And this certification can be acquired through validation of non-formal and informal learning. So people can come there and say like, okay, I want to become a qualified or a certified a professional, and I can, let's say, I can do it through my prior experience recognized. So that's what I was talking about, in the sense that the trade unions or the Chamber of Commerce are involved. In many countries also, the trade unions are going to be involved together with the education and training systems in working together. So in Finland, they have changed the system now, but it used to be that some of the professionals in the sector will be assessors in an educational institution when doing validation of prior learning. So that's what I was talking about, of the involvement of trade unions and associations. There is the European Trade Union Center, ETUC, I can't remember now, but ETUC, Federation, sorry. They actually have, they have developed, they have a couple of publications specifically talking about the importance of validation and how trade unions can play a role. So I can also send you that reference after the meeting, or I can put it in the chat now.
Thank you very much. Now we have still one hand raised, and one question we would like to still on the chat box, and it's a quite important one. We should not miss it. And so I'd like to pass then the floor to Lucas. Lucas from NCTVA. I know that you are from Sierra Leone, isn't it? Lucas Dobbelman. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Eduardo. I actually have a question relating to the last question. The involvement of the other stakeholders, especially the private sector or trade unions, as the case may be. Here in Sierra Leone, we are very early in the stages of the NQF, and NQF, but also recognition of prior learning in particular. I would like to know if there's some user cases to see how you can motivate or make the private sector see what the added value of their involvement in the process is, because here we are struggling with getting them on board. So maybe it is a more general question, but it would be very helpful for this context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there are examples, and probably we will, after the webinar, we can also send, of course, all of you a number of references and links to different reports and resources that could give you concrete cases, examples to your point, Lucas. Maybe if Ernesto or Modest would like to say something about this concrete question, let's say basically how to motivate and incentivize employers and the private sector.
Yeah, I go very brief first, then Modest, if you want to add something. I think that actually is a problem that all the European countries are also facing to some extent. Like, it's very difficult to, well, not very difficult, but it is difficult to involve private stakeholders on these issues. But there is also, as I say, quite a lot of interest. In Sweden, for example, there's now a project with the construction sector that might be interesting and to look at, because they are trying to get the construction sector in Sweden. Well, you know, in Sweden, the sectors have a lot of power and they have a lot of training on, and they have their own sort of certification, if you want, on qualifications. So the Swedish national agency is trying to connect that training that they had in the sectors with the NQF and trying to bring them in. Some of the work that they are doing in the Netherlands, for example, where they try to see in what way involvement of private stakeholders for validation. So there's quite a lot. I have put in the chat a link to the position paper of ETUC. So this is on trade unions. But basically, I think that a lot of it, I think, is a matter of what I was talking about, agreeing on the standards. I think that the stakeholders have a very strong role to play in what are the standards for their sectors, for their companies, for the employees. they really want to know what is happening. Let's say they really want to know or contribute to, this is the skills that we need in our industry. And in that sense, I think it's a good validation plays a major role in kind of connecting to those skills that they need. Also in Ireland, for example, they are doing a lot of good work on the network, the RPL network, where they bring in a lot of private sector institutions, and they have a very interesting examples, some very interesting examples. I sent all these afterwards, some links, as you said.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Modest, you want to add a word about this, or can we go to the next question? There is a question about quality assurance also. And then we immediately pass the floor to Emile Tarmendisch for the country presentation.
Yeah, Eduardo, I think we can pass it. I think my colleague should have addressed issues there.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Before passing the floor to Emile, let us still address this very important question asked by Emmanuel in the chat box. So what are the quality assurance checks that should be considered in RPL, so in validation? If any of you would like to give some views. So what are the elements of quality assurance that need to be considered? Emmanuel is here with us. He just opened his camera. Hi, Emmanuel. What is your country? Can you say? Hi.
Yeah, I'm muted.
You are muted, Emmanuel.
Yeah, good morning. I'm speaking from Sierra Leone.
Okay, Emmanuel, yes, thank you. If anyone wants to say a word about quality assurance in validation or RPL, otherwise we move this question then for the discussion session right after the country presentation. There is also one. Yes, please. What? Yes, please.
Yeah, Eduardo, this is Modest. I was looking just see, I know it's not a country specific, we'll be presenting that on 3rd of March in terms of how RPL is working in Zambia. But looking at the question that has come from Emmanuel, I think based on the guidelines, among the principles we have put in there is issues that for you to implement RPL, you need to have policies and procedures, and those policies must specifically guide the applicants or the candidate in terms of what is expected, how the assessment is supposed to be done. We have provided principles around the roles, who is responsible for what. So all those, when you look at the monitoring mechanisms, that you need to regularly monitor your policies to ensure that you adjust them. So if you put all those in place, that basically gives you the quality assurance mechanisms that will ensure that, yes, indeed, the employers out there and even the awarding body itself is assuring the public that the things are being done accordingly, and the competencies that are being, or the people who are being certified really would have met the competencies. But I thought that's my suggestion, Eduardo. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd like just to say there is also a contribution on the chat box before passing the floor to Ernesto from Andrea. Andrea, would you like to say it yourself? So Andrea says that within the vet sector in Australia, and now the floor is yours, Andrea. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. I won't turn my camera on because I'm in bed. It's very late. Sorry, everybody. I think for us, it's even though the process is different and we have support and self-assessments beforehand, it is we consider it an assessment against the competencies, and therefore all our quality assurance that we require for assessments that occur during training applies to RPL assessments. So we don't see it as any different. It has the same outcome. It is on our academic reports. it's seen as competent. So we see it as just an achievement, and there's a possibility that you don't achieve it. But yeah, so all things apply that would normally apply to what we put around assessment in our TVET sector. Thank you, Eduarda. I'll be quiet.
No, it's excellent that you came in. It's very late in where you are. Thank you so much, Andrea, for this. And Ernesto, just a final word before we go to Cabo Verde.
Yeah, because we have very little time. Just to highlight that, I mean, I fully agree with what Modest said, basically. At the European level, what we are seeing is actually that countries are developing quality assurance frameworks specifically for validation more in the last few years. So basically trying to figure out this kind of question, what aspects of are specific of validation that might differ from other type of assessment. But as Modest said, having a monitoring system and having some checks, and especially what we were discussing also, having professionals that are trained, I think is an important element of the quality assurance.
Thank you very much for this. And now we go from the regional, let's say, approach or continental approach to a specific country experience. So Emile Tarmendisch is going to speak in Portuguese. Colleagues, please use the interpretation facility. Amilcar, you are most welcome. Muito obrigada, Amilcar, mais uma vez por estares conosco e por apresentar.
Thank you once again, Amilcar, for being with us and presenting the interesting case of Cape Verde. You have around 25 to 30 minutes. Amilcar, the floor is yours. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you, Eduarda, for the opportunity to once again having the floor to share another paramount instrument for our NQF in Cape Verde. This is the case of the System for Recognition, Validation, and Certification of Professional of RPL. We have some difficulties in terms of connectivity. So can I switch off my camera to enhance connectivity? Thank you. My presentation will be focusing on 5 relevant topics considering the recognition of competences, validation, and certification. I'll talk about policies and instruments that are strategic in the process of recognition, validation, and certification of competences in Cape Verde. Secondly, I'll talk about the process of putting in place this in Cape Verde. And thirdly, I'll talk about the activities undertaken with regard to this process. Fourth, what are the major gains obtained? Is someone speaking with the microphone on? There's interference? Okay. There's interference for Mr. Matthias. Please mute his microphone.
Sim, estamos a ouvir e estamos a ver. Está no primeiro slide.
You're on your first slide. I can't move to the next slide. Let's switch. I can share my screen, as Eduardo said, she wants to share a screen. Eduardo wants to share a screen for Amilcar to be presenting. Okay, done. On the first moment that I'll talk about policies of RPL, long life learning, as we talk about policies, strategic policies and instruments, we have instruments at various levels. In relation to strategic instruments that has led with the law that acknowledges the recognition, validation, certification of competences. We have many documents such as Decree Law 2010, which establishes the national qualification system that defines the competencies to be considered. We also have major documents such as decree law, which are paramount instruments to implement the recognition, validation, and certification. And I'll talk about some of these documents later on. We have another important document, which is the decree law governing the legal framework of vocational learning that provides the main guidelines to then in 2014 we have defined the decree law to regulate the RBCCR system in Cape Verde. The law was enacted in 2014. Unfortunately, we started implementing only in 2019, 2020 due to some constraints, but I'll later talk about that. On the governance of the system in Cape Verde is to ensure the operationalization of the NQF in Cape Verde together with other stakeholders. We have different partners such as the associations representing the sectors. We have companies and training and education institute, amongst other stakeholders that are part of the RVCC system. On quality assurance, we have other documents on this sense, which is the decree that governs the system to acknowledge and certify competences. We also have the national catalog of qualifications. When we talk about quality assurance, it is important to take into account that the reference for the RVCC process should be on the same line as the training referencing. The RVCC reference was defined based on the referral of competences that then go down into two references, one for the RVCC program and the other for the training referral. It's based on these two documents that we have defined, the referral for competences, and we also have the referral for certification of competences and for training as a process to ensure quality. Another important document is the accreditation of entities. Not all entities should be engaged in the process of recognition, validation, and certification. They should first be accredited to undertake those three steps. We have the regime for concession of instruments and the operationalization of the system. And we have all those instruments that we consider those instruments. The state, through the national qualification system, we have the certifying entities, we have the associations of the sector, as well as engaging the private sector that we're trying to bring on board as an entity that supports us in ensuring quantity in this process. In relation to financing, which is the main problem that we face, we have the budget that we have in the system itself for the recognition, validation, and certification. It is funded from the state budget, and especially through international cooperation, as well as paying fees by the candidates that want to be engaged in the process as partners. We have learning and training institutions companies, and associations representing sectors. They are all part of the whole RVCC system to implement the process. Before continuing on the operational area, I want to emphasize something that we consider as pertinent. Now in Cape Verde, we have three means of assessing qualification. One, by the training, using the training referral based on the learning outcomes and the curriculum. We have another means of assessing, which is the certification of the quality, which is the recognition of competences through RVCC based on the competence elements that were defined in our referral. We can also do certification through the two models. One through the RVCC program process and through training if cannot be fully certified through the RVCC. Another main means of assessing training is by looking at the qualification in other countries. Let's also emphasize, according to the law, we can undertake the recognition of recognition, validation, and certification of professional skills. However, we have decided to start with the recognition, validation, and certification of professional competences. We are looking at professional certification and not yet the academic certification, which is much more difficult. In relation to the instruments, looking at the second process, which is the part on the implementation, we have different instruments that support us to define the RVCC referral. We have the National Catalog of Qualifications. We have the referral of competences, and we define certification by competences. We also have the evaluation instruments that were developed to support in the operationalization of the process. In relation to who are the beneficiaries of the RVCC program, according to the law, are people with at least 25 years old and have at least 5 years of professional experience. The law also looks at academic requirements for the recognition of competencies. And this is also extensive to the problem that we have, since for us to move to the level 4 and 5 RVCC system, you need academic background that our candidates do not have. So it should be changed, the law, since it is important that the candidates have competences, regardless of being academic or not. Yet, if they can show that they have their competences can be validated and certified. This is what we have to ensure, that's what we propose, that the law is changed to ensure that everyone can be part of the process. We also have different forms to be completed at the RVCC system, such as the professional background, the training background, assessment instruments, and most importantly is the professional portfolio that the candidate should prepare. And based on this portfolio, the candidate will be assessed and certified. It is important that the whole background of the candidate is defined in the professional portfolio that can be used as an instrument to assess and certify competences. On the network of operators that we have for accreditation within the RVCC system, we have different stakeholders, such as the National Directorate of Employment that supports the National Qualification System unit on implementing the process. We have certified or accredited entities. not every accredited entity is not necessarily certified, cannot necessarily certify competences. Even those entities that are certified for training activities should then request a new accreditation process to be part of the recognition, validation, and certification process. We have vocational learning schools, as well as public and private training centers. They are all parts of the network in implementing the process. Regarding the technical and pedagogical team of the RVCC system, since they are key to implementing the process, in our process, we have the coordinator of the process that will manage the whole system. Then we have the information and the guidance technician for each area. We have advisors. After that, internal reviewer and external reviewer. The internal reviewer will provide credibility to the system, and the external reviewer will certify at the end the candidates. They're part of the jury, and who will assess will be the external reviewer. According to what the other presenters have also mentioned, there are stages of the process and certification. We have the information and the guidance, and then assessment of the process, and then we give the necessary follow-up. Not all the candidates have the profile to be part of the process for recognition and validation and certification of processes. So the candidates will be then referred to the training, self-training process, or to the certification process. Those in the RVCC process will be going through the recognition of competences that will be looking at the competences that the candidate has. They have to look out for the evidences, not just mention the evidences, but show those evidences in the portfolio. Then this advisor will support the candidate in preparing the portfolio to have the validation process. Then this candidate will go to the second stage on the validation of competences. Based on the portfolio and the evidences that were identified, the candidate will do some practical work to theoretical work to ensure validation, to ensure or to show that the evaluator will see in which unit this candidate will be referred to for certification purposes. The candidate cannot be certified for every competence. So there'll be an internal reviewer that will see which units the candidate will be certified. And when the internal reviewer identifies which competence or units or group of competences will be certified, then we'll define. Sorry for talking about the operational part. This is important. Just slow down.
Aqui, nessa última parte, passando
on the last part, after validation, we'll go through a jury of certification comprised of the advisor, internal reviewer, and one external reviewer, which is the key member of the jury, as he or she has the deciding power over the certification of competences. So the candidate can have full or partial certification. For partial certification, the candidate issues a personal qualification, is issued a personal partial qualification certificate, and then this candidate is then referred to the training, on the job training or self-training, and after that can be certified, fully certified. And if there are modules, they can have formative modules, they can do certain modules to be fully certified. If the entity that has undertaken the module can then provide a full certification. In the case of a self-training or on-the-job training, the candidates go through the validation process, internal validation process again. And if the internal reviewer considers that the candidate has the necessary competences, then the jury can certify, can fully certify the candidate if the candidate has acquired the necessary competences. Basically, this is the process that we follow. There are fees paid for the registration and participation and certification. Yet, I think that it's around 263 euros or 290 US dollars. That's not much. If we consider that the candidates or on the training, the candidate pays even more on the trainings. However, we should consider that not everyone has the money to pay for certification. Based on a foreign aid incorporation, we have implemented the process, and it's around some of the processes are already funded, and the prices are reduced. The actions undertaken for the implementation of the process, we had to undergo various phases. First, we had training sessions of the team that would implement the process. Between 2019 and 2020, 60 members were trained, members of the team that implemented some certification actions. For example, in the tourism business, during the pandemic, we have people that were trained. We had 11 candidates, 7 were fully certified, and 4 had partial certification. Those that had 4 partial certification was because they had problems with English, and they went through the process of training. They are ready. They have finished the English language module, and they have the requirements now to be fully certified. There's another activity that took place and is already completed. This is a process regarding customer service at level 5. We had 30 candidates, 25 had full certification and 5 partial certification, since they still require they are required to complete some modules. In this case, the 25 are fully certified, and the other 5 still have to complete modules. We have another ongoing process, which is pumping and building construction. That's level 3, 25. We had 25 candidates, and they are in the process of internal reviewing. So this is a whole set of actions that we have undertaken. We don't have enough funds at the moment. However, what we want to do is to outreach the other Cape Verdean islands. We have started the process here at the Santiago Island. There is something really important to consider. Here in Cape Verde, some professions have been regulated, meaning that you need to have a professional card. So the validation and recognition of competences will enable that those that have 25 to 30 years of experience can be candidates for the professional membership card. That's what we aim for this year, to regulate other areas that remain unregulated, and we are in the process. In relation to benefits, with great emotion, we enjoy seeing individuals that are 25 or 30 years old being certified. So in terms of benefits, we can look at 3 perspectives. In personal benefits, since if individuals can have self-knowledge, self-trust, it has a self-esteem, motivation of those individuals. So we have the personal, the professional benefits. It increases trust, self-esteem, and motivation, and that will reflect on the professional side. Professional side will also improve. The third perspective is the social perspective, which is social recognition, which is very important. The increase on the level of qualification, the issue of employability, since very often those that do not have certificates, are not certified, are not selected when they apply for a job by the simple fact that they don't have a document of certification. The other aspect in the professional side, which is very important, is the reduce the gap between those with no training, those certified and those not certified. So recognition and validation of competences will reduce the gap we have between certified individuals and not certified individuals. This is to say that this is a very motivating and emotional process, looking at processes of validation, and this is highly emotional for us. In terms of challenges, we have many. I'll focus on some of them. Operationalization of the RVCC system. We have implemented this system, but candidates should be diagnosed, referred, and the profile of candidates should be as adequate as possible. This is very important. Another challenge is that in the process of validation of competences, I've also we have another challenge in the sense that we have candidates with very low literacy level in level 4 and 5. We also have to look at the motivation and experiences in terms of competences. Very often, we might find that an adult person can be in the process, and we have those references. Yet we don't have, we don't have those qualifications. So it's important that we should fit the professional path of the candidates to its motivations, experiences, and competences. Another challenge is the mapping the needs on the RVCC system at the national level. We want to know at national level who are part of the process, in which areas. So we need to map needs. This is the challenge we have, and develop a digital platform to manage the RVCC system. We should have a digital system whereby individuals can write and identify the areas of interest and also interact with the candidates. Last but not least is the sustainability of the process. So those are the challenges we have. So in general, that's what I wanted to present. And thank you for your attention, for the opportunity. And thank you, Eduardo, for once again giving us the opportunity and the floor to present what we're doing in Cape Verde, and we are open for questions that you might have. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Amilcar, por teres falado de emoção.
Thank you very much, Amilcar, for talking about the emotion or happiness. We know that all that validation gives us wings and opportunities.
Emotion, because everything we do in this context is, of course, to raise dignity, self-esteem of people. Everybody has learned, has a lot of value. So thanks for mentioning this. So if you have questions, colleagues, please, the floor is yours. You can ask questions. You can raise any questions to Amilcar. I think he has given a very clear, detailed, comprehensive presentation about the system, the legal base, the practices, the concrete experiences now, pilot experiences taking place, and also challenges. He also outlined a number of very important areas of work for the future. So maybe colleagues, those who are developing systems or have already a lot of experience, maybe you want to interact, ask any question or make any comments to Amilcar. Please, there is a hand raised. Please, you take the floor, colleague. 2 hands raised already. Please take the floor. Monsieur Bakour du Maroc. Bonjour, Monsieur Bakour. Toujours ravi de vous voir.
Oui, merci, chers collègues.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Hello, Eduardo, how are you? Doing well. Good to see you. I have a small question, though, but it's important. It's regarding formal learning and regarding validation of prior learning. For informal learning, mainly on informal learning, how? Knowing that, how we define informal learning, using the different definitions. There's a non-intentional character in the way of understanding. So how can we measure, quantify, validate this kind of learning so that we can give a certification or a qualification, partial one or total one? Usually it's a partial validation. Thank you, that's my question.
The question is about actually the integration of different types of learning in validation. So, and especially focus on informal learning. Any additional question that we could immediately have from you, from colleagues, and maybe then Amilcar and any other participant who would like also to discuss the question just asked by Mr. Bakur. Please, you can take the floor. Amilcar, se quiser dar uma contribuição a esta questão, como é que a aprendizagem informal
Amilcar, please, can you explain us how the informal learning works?
So we have for now just one question. Who would like to take the floor? So we also have, let's try to address this question first before asking Maha, unless Maha, you want to contribute.
No, it's a question, so please go ahead with the first one.
Okay. I think this is a very important question because it's a little bit the question of integration of different forms of learning. And what is it that validation, recognition of prior learning addresses? It is actually this, a setup of skills, knowledge, skills, and competences. So if you want to, anyone wants to contribute, Andrea, also Ernesto, or if Brigitte Bouquet, if you also would like to say a word. Because you just take the floor.
I don't want to take the, maybe Amin wants to talk.
If you want to respond.
I mean, I can say something, but you know, I don't want to take the, I don't want to monopolize, let's say, the discussion. But I think that it is precisely the key. I mean, if I understood the question correctly, but it's really the key of validation in a way. Like, how can we, like, how difficult this? There is such a diverse set of experiences that we are trying. You know, the informal learning is not a structure. It's all this kind of experience that is really, so it becomes very complicated to find adequate tools, let's say, that really can capture this variety of learning. We are having a lot of trouble at the European level in a way, of a lot of discussion about in what way are we gonna certify transversal skills, no? But I think the key is, again, to focus on what is the standard and what is the objective of the validation process. So if we know what is that we want to achieve, either an identification of certain skills or a certain type of certification that is related to the formal system, what we need to kind of is to translate that into learning outcomes that then they are assessed. And I think the difficulty is we need to figure out a way of assessing that doesn't stop, let's say, people that have not acquired those learning outcomes through formal system, that it doesn't stop them from also being assessed in a fair way. Because I think that one of the problems we are having at the European level is that we are just creating a, if you want, a parallel system to the formal system, where you just do the same thing that you were doing in the formal system. It's just you are assessing, you are opening up the assessment, if you want, to others, which I think is okay. But the assessment needs to be maybe also different in the sense that there are certain aspects of assessment that won't be able to capture this informal learning approach. So I think that the question is still, let's say, we are still trying to answer it really. I don't know if that, just, I don't think I'm giving an answer, I'm just contributing to the.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for this. Then I would, okay, Amilcar, yes, please. Pode.
Bom, a questão levantada é muito pertinente.
Well, this question is very important, and it's not easy to answer. But how can we assess the informal and formal learning? I think we can do this by defining tools that allow us to have competencies that are important professionally. This pattern of competencies will help us through some tools that will help us to establish some activities. And these candidates or applicants can showcase what they can do, and also explain how this is done theoretically. I think this will allow us to go forward. And we must also have the tools to assess the formal learning. We have to use the tools that allow us to assess the informal and formal competencies of the individuals. As as the colleague who spoke before me said, it is important to bring a definition of competencies, because having the right tools and having also people with the competencies to assess these people, I think in this way we can reach the right solution. As my former colleague said, there are a lot of aspects that are not easy to assess, but I think that using the right tools, we can assess the basics that will allow us to see if the person can perform all activities that have been drafted. The learning outcomes the learning outcomes in Cape Verde are defined in the formal learning process here. But it is a showcase of competencies when it comes to informal sector. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emile.
Now, so let us try to be as efficient as possible. Please, Maha was the first colleague who raised their hand, then Andrea and Jacqueline. Maha?
Thank you, Eduardo. Well, it's a good model that Cabo Verde has presented. We wish them luck, but I have three quick small questions. The first is, they mentioned training offering by the same authorities or bodies that provide the RPL. Does that represent a kind of conflict of interest, making them inclined to be strict in the assessment so that they provide training? This training is a source of income. That's the first one.
Não estou a ouvir.
The second is about the value of the system.
Sorry, the speaker sound is not very clear. Does not come very clearly. Can Maha repeat, please?
The first question or what?
Yes, can Maha repeat the first question, please? The first question. First question.
A interpretação?
No.
No.
The first question is about the conflict of interest, being a provider and an assessor at the same time. It's when the private sector will take the responsibility, for example, of doing the assessment and they do the training. Wouldn't that make them strict assessors, or they tend to refuse or deny the recognition of the competency in order to provide the training that is a money maker? That's the first question. The second is about the value of the certificate. As in Ernesto's presentation, he said that people don't look at the certificate of RPL as the certificate or the qualification that is gained from formal learning. So in your model, have you done some form of promotion, or do you have a plan for raising the awareness and removing a stigma from RPL certificates? And the third is sustainability, because as you have presented, it was all funded through development partners and so on. When these projects cease to be, and you will be on your own. I know that the learners or the trainees, they pay, but come to think of it, those who don't have qualification and need to prove their competences are the poorest of the communities. Most qualified persons do have can pay. So if this sort of funding is not present, and people wouldn't always be able to pay the fees for the assessment, what alternatives do you offer? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like then to, thanks a lot. We took note of the questions. Amilcar took note of the three questions, including the question on sustainability, the last one. The first one was also a very important one on the possible conflict of interest between being a training provider and at the same time also an accredited provider of RPL. And so I would like to ask then Andrea and Jacqueline also to please submit or express your views or questions. Try to be short, please. Thank you. Andrea and then Jacqueline. Unmute.
Unmute. Is that fine? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine. It's fine.
I was going back to Mr. Bakur's question, which was, how do you do it? Assess, recognize non-formal and informal learning. And I think that particular person has achieved those knowledge and skills or those competencies. And so it's about knowing what sort of evidence they would have. It's about designing the assessments to assess them. And check their achievement as if you would students who are in your class, but it may not be the same assessment tools. And I acknowledge what Ernesto said about the fact that in Europe, they're just using the same assessments. We would expect that the assessor would become familiar with that candidate, talk to them, work out the evidence, and decide whether it may be a portfolio or it might be a set of tasks that need to be created for them. And we would expect that to occur. Having said that, going back to Maha's point, it's very difficult and time intensive for one person. And so it becomes a question of, yes, funding, or it may be assessors' time to sit, talk to them, interview them, design assessment tools especially for them. I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe at this stage, we could say, remember that as validation or RPL is not only about assessment. It is not only the assessment. It is preceded by important fundamental steps that are exactly about knowing, profiling, knowing, identifying, documenting. So those steps are before the assessment, and they are fundamental. And I think this has been said since the very first presentation today, and it is not only assessment. Maybe then, Jacqueline, please, would you like to say your, to express your comment? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mine is to add on to what the others have said about recognition of prior learning. It's important for us all probably to remember that we are recognizing prior learning to enhance transition and allow progression. Then if that is the case, it's important therefore that we cluster the competencies, because progression can go different directions. It's important first that we cluster the competencies, we who want to validate them. Then once we cluster the competencies, then that informs the types of tools that we shall use to assess, evaluate, or rather measure whether this particular person qualifies to move to the next level, or what level of entry will this person qualify to assess for, to enter. For example, the tools that we shall require to assess hard skills, such as construction-related or motor vehicle, are different from the tools that we shall use to assess language-related skills that have been acquired before. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very, very fundamental comment. And thanks a lot, Jacqueline. Can you please tell what is your country and organization?
Well, thank you so much. I'm from Kenya, from Karatina University, the Deputy Registrar Academic Affairs.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Any additional question or comment immediately? Not? Then now, I think we had a quite good, intensive discussion, and I'd like just to go back to one comment that was done before on the chat box, and we left it exactly for this part of the webinar, and it was a comment about certification of providers. Maha has asked this question earlier during the first part of the webinar, so about qualifications or training professionalization of RPL validation professionals. And so there was a response given here by Brigitte Bouquet from France Compétences. She said, in France, quality assurance certification for the providers of guidance for RPL, let's say, institutions, and more qualifications registered in our system for people working in these institutions. So that's an important comment done here, input about the fact that more qualifications that contribute to quality assurance and to the professionalization of providers of guidance for in the context of RPL are being registered in the French national repertoire. So if, please, Amilcar, you have still the floor, please, and then we move immediately to the final session. Thank you, Amilcar.
Não, era apenas para...
I wanted just to answer the question that was raised by Maha regarding a recognition of competencies that are in the, of how the companies acknowledge the competence. We implement the process here, and we have raised awareness, and we try to gather ideas for the process. We involved the community, all the society and the companies in the process. There were a lot of sessions that were held with the companies. The companies are more concerned with the progression of the applicants or candidates who are in the companies, because when they get certificates, they will need to be promoted in their companies. That's where, so the companies have their policies, and according to their policies and the financial capacity, then they can promote them. Then this is very difficult because the candidates, when they get the qualification, they want to get promoted right away. Then there's an issue of certificates that was raised. The way, as we did with the certificates, these certificates are promulgated or are certified, then the certificate of process recognition go through assessment. This shows the value of the certificate at the national level. The funding is also a challenge. It's true that if we hadn't sorry, if we don't have the international cooperation to fund us, well, this is going to be difficult. So we have to find a framework in order to go ahead. Thank you.
I have to still ask you patience. There is one question addressed to you specifically from Cabo Verde, from ARES, which is the regulatory authority for higher education, asking, when do you plan to initiate, to start the recognition and validation of competences, academic competence for academic qualifications in higher education, and what will be the modalities? So that you already said that this is not yet, of course, enforced and prepared. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is a conversation you will have with Paula later from ARES going forward, but if you already want to say something here.
Eu posso.
Please. Pode.
Eu acho que, só de uma forma muito breve, eu acho que...
I would like to say that without the right qualifications, we are going to face problems to implement the qualifications. The first issue has to do with the available offers. We will have a structure. We must have a structure that allows us to do this recognition. Regarding academic validation, we work professionally. I mean, from the professional level up to the level 5. We don't work with the higher education. But I think that the instruments must be established, and they go beyond defining programs based on competencies, but based on learning outcomes. Only so we can start establishing this. Thank you.
I think that we had many questions and good discussion and exchanges. And now we pass the floor to Kailash for his very brief remarks as a discussant. And then I still ask you colleagues to please bear with us for an additional 10 minutes for a poll. So we would really like you to contribute to this poll. It will give us your views and further even contribution to our ACQF guideline going forward. So first of all, we have Kailash. Please, Kailash, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eduarda. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It has been a pleasure actually listening to all our different high caliber speakers and even the questions and answers. I mean, it has been so much learning there. So congratulations indeed. Yeah, well, when we're talking about recognition of prior learning or any other of the different terminologies that are being used to recognize learning acquired non-formally and informally, this is actually being debated in different quarters around the globe today. And it is comforting to note from the presentations that centrality of the individual occupies an important part in RPL. It is a known saying that customer is king. And I believe that this applies to RPL too. Whenever we design an RPL process, we should consider the primary beneficiary. And it is no doubt the RPL candidate who should be at the center of all the processes. The guidelines which were presented by Modeste show the different stages of RPL, which is more or less the same in all countries having implemented RPL, and thus making the invisible competencies becoming visible. And here I like this concept from Ernesto about the invisible man. Of course, we do not have a one-size-fits-all model for RPL, and each country must contextualize their own model based on their needs and resources available. We also note that the RVCC is well anchored in the various laws in Cape Verde, and this legal basis of RPL is an important factor in all countries, because it is this legal basis that gives the process of RPL its credibility and place in the education and training landscape. One important aspect in RPL is the hope that we ignite in the heart of the person seeking RPL. And the Cape lesson is that a personal qualification plan is issued to the RPL candidate. A training pathway is given to the person acquiring a partial qualification so as to enable him or her to get a full qualification. And it is this hope that we must keep ongoing for that person to go into lifelong learning. There are several advantages and challenges. I mean, there has been a lot of discussion around these in the presentations. And whenever RPL is established in any country, there are many challenges, but I can only talk about a few here. The first challenge, and we've been talking about it, is awareness of RPL. RPL is another mode of certification or access to a program. And the most common challenge faced by many countries is that there is not enough awareness. People do not know about RPL.
Yes.
These countries have very good RPL systems, but unfortunately, the number of people coming forward to be RPL is relatively low. Therefore, continuous awareness campaigns have to be run in a very pragmatic and coherent manner. And language should not be a barrier in RPL, whether it is in communicating about RPL or even in the documentation and assessment of RPL. RPL people should be celebrated similarly as it is done when we have formal graduation ceremonies. Other issue, we've talked about sustainability. Funding issues often become a hurdle in RPL. RPL has cost associated with it, and it has been presented by our colleague from Cape Verde. Funding of RPL should be considered from training levy funds where applicable. Donor agencies can also contribute to alleviate this challenge. Jordan is a recent example where ILO, through the generous support of governments of Netherlands, Norway, and United States, have funded RPL for Syrian refugees in the construction sector. And another challenge which have been discussed also is qualified personnel in the RPL processes. Yes. These series of RPL webinars are of course contributing in capacity building of RPL practitioners. But we also need dedicated courses to train people in RPL processes, as limited number of RPL practitioners is a limiting factor in many countries. There are a number of challenges, but unfortunately I will not be able to discuss all of them due to this time constraint. However, it is important that we reflect on how the ACQF can further support RPL across the continent in future. RPL can only be given its deserved importance if trust is maintained in the system. The credibility which the ACQF has gained until now is a building block to create this trust in all the different stakeholders across the continent. If stakeholders trust that the person who has obtained his or her certificate through RPL is as capable or even better than the person who has gone through the formal learning, then we have a high probability that RPL will work for Africa. ACQF supporting and disseminating RPL can only be beneficial to the people of our continent. For example, showcasing the good practices, speaking in the different international workshops and conferences, allowing RPL beneficiaries to speak about their experiences can be means by which the ACQF can support RPL in Africa. ACQF can also support pilot projects at country or even across sectoral levels. For example, last week we had a conference on Tibet for the Indian Ocean Islands, and RPL came out in all the presentations made. And here I would like to thank Eduarda, who made a remarkable presentation to ACQF to the participants. And one of the recommendations which came out was how can we link ACQF to the mobility of learners and workers of our region as well. For example, tourism is one of the economic sectors which badly needs RPL in the region. And maybe ACQF can support a pilot project in this region, which already has Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar as members of the ACQF. Building capacity of RPL practitioners in an economic sector which is important in a country or region would be an enabler for RPL, and ACQF can be that major player. We can easily argue that formal learning is not sufficient to facilitate and utilize the full human potential of any country. And RPL is an important instrument which can be used to eliminate discrimination against those who have acquired skills and competencies in the non-formal and informal systems. RPL is a mechanism which motivates individuals for lifelong learning, and outcome-based NQFs can act as reference points for the recognition of non-formal and informal learning. In conclusion, we can say that the ACQF through NQFs can support RPL in several ways. To end, I will say, Eduarda said it, RPL gives us wings. I would say ACQF gives us wings. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. You made me cry again. That's not good. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Kailash, for this very, very inspiring remarks and for talking about hope, about trust, and about eliminating discrimination, building capacity, and access for mobility for learners in the region, in different regions or across the continent. Thank you so much. And so now, colleagues, we will complete this webinar today with, again, your views, please. And for that purpose, please check on the chat box. Alina, our colleague Alina, is going to give us the link. She already pasted, yes, the link to the web to a Mentimeter. And the Mentimeter has 5 questions. It's very easy. You just click and you will be immediately in the Mentimeter, in which you have 5 questions. And so, Alina, let's go slowly. So first is status of RPL in your country. And there are several options there. What is the current status? Is it advanced? Is it starting? Is it in the first stages of development? You have time to join, to connect to the Mentimeter. We already have 5 participants. Great. Please join. 6. Thank you. 7 participants. And participants. So we see that we have many cases of RPL in development. It is in development. Many where the system is advanced. Others are saying there is no information about RPL in the country. That's also an interesting finding. That's the point just made by Kailash about lack of awareness, information on RPL also. We have now 13 participants who joined. Let us take still 30 seconds for this first question. So as we see, the majority of participants are saying that RPL is in development. So it's not at advanced stage of development. And we see also in the chat box, the same point made just by our colleague from Cameroon, Professor Rodolphine Wamba. Okay. We have now 16 participants in the Mentimeter, in the poll. Okay, good. Now, 18 participants, let us just take another 10 seconds to move to the next question. Okay. So the next question is, Alina, you can already move to the next. Okay. The next question is, which qualifications can be obtained through RPL processes in your country? One possibility is all qualifications that are on the NQF. Another possibility, all qualifications on NQF except higher education. Another one is only TVET qualifications, only partial qualifications, or even none. No qualifications can be obtained through RPL. Okay, thank you. Only TVET or also all? Thanks for this. This question is yours, Modest. It is, remember, it was one of the questions you had asked for the survey. So we are doing the survey live for you with your question.
Okay, that's good.
Interesting. We see 5 cases, all qualifications on the NQF can be obtained through RPL processes. Or only TVET. We have also one clearly saying except higher education, all except higher education. Professor Rodolphine from Cameroon says all qualifications on the NQF can be obtained through RPL. Okay, so now we have 14 responses. Thank you. We give another 20 seconds if anyone else wants to add or if anyone wants to reply still. If not, Alina, we can move to the next, please. Thank you. And then this is a question that was actually proposed by Andrea. Andrea, are you there? Main barriers and challenges for wider RPL implementation in your country. So what are the barriers you see? And today we learned about some of these challenges. So what do you say? What do you say about the barriers or challenges for wider, better RPL implementation in your country? Okay, interesting. We see that there is a sort of predominance of a challenge related with lack of trained RPL professionals and also lack of RPL centers, providers, financial resources. So Also, lack of information and guidance for the public appears as a challenge. But the bulk, so the most important, most frequently mentioned barrier or challenge is lack of trained RPL professionals. So this brings us to the suggestion, the recommendation just made by Kailash about much more training, and that ACQF should play a role in this, exactly in meeting this very important objective. Train professionals of various profiles for identification, documentation, assessment in validation or RPL context. Thank you. So we had here 13 persons responding. Thank you very much. And now, Alina, we can already move to the next. And so this is a question about what do you recommend to enable, to improve, to activate RPL in your country? What is it that you consider important in your country to activate, to enable RPL? And there are here various possibilities. You can tick any, more than one, of course. That's also a question, that's also Andrea's question. So we do the survey live. Okay, 13 persons are already replying. Yeah, so interesting. We see that many participants consider change of mindset as important. All forms of learning are valuable. Another one is big RPL information campaign. Involvement of employers appears also as a very frequently mentioned enabler. Then, of course, we have an NQF. That's good that people are mentioning NQF playing an important role, must play a role. Financial resources and supportive legislation. Then we have cooperation between subsectors of education and training, like higher education, VET, general, of course. Professor Rodolphine Wamba is replying through the chat box, considering cooperation between subsectors as very important. Quality assurance of RPL is also important, so for the credibility of the process and the outcomes. Validity, credibility. Thank you. That's, I think, a very interesting picture we have here. Maybe that's also a picture for Ernesto, for your research.
Absolutely, yeah, very, very useful. For the evaluation, for the update of the guidelines, you know that we had similar, not exactly the same questions, but similar questions. So yeah, and I'm seeing in some cases it's very similar, in some cases a little bit different. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the webinar, and I also in your conference, and I responded to many of those questions via the not Mentimeter. Okay, so we have here a very interesting picture. So this is also a contribution to ACQF going forward, ideas that ACQF should consider in the next stage of implementation. Thank you. And also, of course, for Modest, for the guidelines. So for the update. And now a concrete question. Please just write in your own words. Here there is no multiple choice. It's an open-ended question. How should ACQF support RPL or validation, RVCC, VAE in the near future? Your ideas. You can just write your own ideas, and including, of course, Ernesto, Andrea, everybody, Dennis, please, Paula, in all languages, French, Portuguese. Swahili also, Kiswahili. Dr. Mukwana will help us translate. Who starts with one suggestion? What is it that you consider ACQF should do or propose? Okay, assuring that there are agreed standards among stakeholders, capacity development of relevant staff, more awareness creation and campaign, study tours, training of RPL practitioners, any additional facilitate sharing of experiences by those who have developed RPL systems. Yeah, very good. Best practices for private sector involvement, very good point, because it's a bit of a challenge. Capacity building, more discussions, more campaigns. So the link between RPL and higher education, for instance, where is the transition point? Can one shift the link and integration? Open resources for good practice, network that can build a community of practice. Yes, that's an idea that appeared today very clearly. So that's a point also for the guideline, the idea of network, information sharing. Individual countries, support individual countries to establish and implement RPL through capacity building, awareness, train human resources and share best practices throughout the continent. We have already, so 15 contributors. Development of policy guidelines and procedures involving all stakeholders with quality assurance considerations. Thank you. On the chat box, let me also check what is happening. And we will finish very, very soon, colleagues. This was the last question we had for you, and thank you for all these indications, contributions. Now on the chat box, we have, for example, cooperation between subsectors of education, financial resources, aider à élaborer le RNCP. So
to help develop
of the repertoire, the catalog, standards, and translate diplomas, let's say, into competences or learning outcomes. I think that it was exactly the point also raised by Amilcar a bit before. Okay. Okay, so I think we have more or less reached the conclusion of our Mentimeter and also of this webinar. With big thank you. This was our first webinar on RPL, specifically dedicated to it. So I think all our speakers were really wonderful. They introduced and discussed not only the expectations, what has been done, but also way forward, some challenges and how possibilities to address them, and perspectives, new perspectives. And really, we have a lot to learn from each other. So just to finalize, I wanted to say that our next webinar is on the 3rd of March, same time, and we will have the following cases: Zambia, Cameroon, and France. And we also hope to have the contribution of the Kenyan National Federation of Jua Kali associations, which represent the informal sector, and they are an important interest party in RPL validation. I'd like also to say that if any of you, any of the countries is interested to share experience, to share your concrete policy and system on RPL system, please send us a message or simply write in the chat box. And we can try to schedule your presentation in the two coming, one of the two coming webinars. The third webinar will be on the 24th of March, and there we have the cases of Senegal, Mozambique, and Portugal. So that one looks like not English speaking at all, French and Portuguese speaking, the last one. But please, if you are interested to present your case, your country case, just send us an email or write also in the chat box. Thank you very much, everybody. A big thank you to the interpreters, as always. Without them, it'd be very difficult. And please, let us all do a round of applause to Ernesto, to Modest, and to Amilcar, but really lively. We can do it. Thank you so much. And I hope we continue this cooperation with Ernesto and learning from you, and you also taking some ideas from this community of 55 countries. Thank you very much. Paula, vai começar também no ensino superior, não se preocupe. Thank you very much, colleagues. Let us all open the cameras and take a picture for the finalization of our day, of our first webinar. Dennis, thank you so much for having stayed with us until the end.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sagal, very nice to see you. We meet next week, Sagal. Maxwell, very welcome. Maxwell from Ghana. Hey. Thank you. Please open your cameras, colleagues, so we take a nice picture of this beautiful day and webinar. Thank you so much. With all the emotion. And so we can now say goodbye and we stay in touch. We hope we can count on you. Lucas, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you again. Thank you so much, colleagues, everybody. Muito obrigada a todos. Merci beaucoup à tous. Merci. À très bientôt. Alberto, Paula, todos. Grande abraço a todos. Merci. Anna
Merci.
and Alina, thank you very, very much for all the work done. Thank you so much. So see you very soon, 3rd March again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.